Good morning, everybody, one and all. Welcome back to another edition of Astro Weather. This is the 12th of January, and we're going to be here for about the next 20 minutes, perhaps a little bit more. I'm working on my economy, especially with the Virgo Moon, and we're going to be breaking down some of the currents, some of the cosmic currents that are flowing through our lives today, and getting ready to ramp up for the weekend as well. So, of course, we'll have our weekend forecast tomorrow at 8 a.m. here on this channel. So, in the spirit of the Virgo moon, let us not tarry and let us not deter from our task at hand, which is sharing the information of the day. So we're back. We're still in the Virgo moon. And I was thinking about the Virgo moon today as it moves into that third decan. Well, it was clearly headed in that direction yesterday. So today, the third decan being the Taurus decan. And again, you know, we're looking at the content of our emotion and our emotional intentionality being planted or inserted into places where it will bear fruit. Right. That is the nature of this moon and this decan. And we have a really nice trine going on with the Sun and Pluto in Capricorn. And it feels to me like this would be today and even going into tomorrow. I try to get as much work done as possible, because as the moon moves into Libra for the weekend, it's going to be conjuncting Ceres. And that's a really good time to socialize. It's a really good time to bake bread with the bread that you've baked during the Virgo moon. How's that? How's that for some astrological alliteration? But it definitely feels like, to some extent, like last weekend with the Cancer full moon, we kind of had weekend energy. If you were spending it with friends and family, right? That was a really good moon to sit down and be nurtured and nourished on an emotional level. And there's some of that this weekend too, but it's more relational, right? So this weekend could be pretty nice date weekend. Hint, hint. Oh, speaking of date, what are you doing? Oh my God. He scaled up the side of the couch today. That was a dramatic entrance. Of course, it wouldn't be a show without the Astro Cat. Thanks for being here. He's a Taurus. Can't you tell? He's a Taurus. Anyway, I really like this moon. And I know that the Virgo moon gets a bit of a bad rap, but under the circumstances of our time, of our current condition, I think the Virgo moon can really serve a purpose with these ingresses and transits through the sign of Virgo, which basically helps us clean up our act. And for many of us, myself included, it took me a few years to clean up my act. And now with the social condition as it is, having a clean act and a clean body is really, really important. So with the moon trine Pluto, wherever you put your emotional intent is transformational, right? And you don't always understand or know how it will turn out. If you show up, if you're consistent, if you are able to continue to keep moving forward during a time like this, it feels to me like your efforts are rewarded. Because one of the things that we have been shown over, again, the last 2.5 years is inconsistency. Inconsistency in terms of public messaging, inconsistency in terms of public policy, right? So when we have an opportunity with a pretty interesting moon like this, right, when you can display consistency, when you can display that kind of everyday, even though it's not sexy, efficiency, it pays off. Today's one of those days where your consistency and your showing up pays off. And maybe you've already been doing this, but as the moon moves closer into that trine with Pluto, you'll see some of the benefits from it. Again, this is a good time for you to look at your health and not just clean up your act in terms of your habituation and patterns, but also your physical body as well. Now, Mercury has moved behind the sun. Now it's back there by 12 degrees retrograde. And I was thinking about this yesterday as it relates to Davos, which starts next week. And we have the sun conjuncting Pluto. And that's a pretty powerful time for world leaders to get together and discuss the fate of the planet. And especially with Mercury cloistered and occulted behind it all. It's an interesting transit to kind of wrap your head around as we zoom out and look at the global picture and people that seem to be architecting what's taking place, like banning gas stoves. Hello, Saturn and Pisces. I was talking about this over on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and people were incredulous. How could that be? How could that be? Well, here you go. You're seeing Saturn. See, I'll give you a hint about Saturn. Just before it's about to change signs from Aquarius to Pisces, it gives you clues. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it. The Biden administration talked about banning gas stoves and how gas stoves are one of the biggest causes of asthma. They want everybody on the electric grid. Okay, that's Pluto and Aquarius. It's the electric grid. So this is an interesting time, especially as it relates to some of this information, pardon the pun, that's being leaked out with Saturn and Pisces. Looking at today's chart, we can also see, speaking of Pisces, Juno at 29 Pisces, getting ready to move into Aries. You know what that means? That means an early spring. That's right. Juno represents new beginnings, fruitfulness, fertility. And as it moves into Aries, the first sign, Aries, the sign of the astrological new year, the sign of spring, Juno is about to let us know that winter is moving further and further in our rearview mirror. I think it was last week where I think it was it? Oh, God, I apologize, but it's on the tip of my tongue. Was it Steve? They said that it feels like spring in Pennsylvania, and I looked around, and those were my thoughts that morning. It felt and looked a lot like spring, which is weird, right? It's a very strange kind of realization to have in January in South Central Texas. And yesterday it was probably close to 80 degrees. So Juno in Aries is the promise of an early spring, right? What else do we have? Mars is station. So I think the highest degree of impatience is today with Mars station, right? We have Mars station with the inconjunct with Mercury retrograde, right? So we have these two retrograde planets. One is station, and yet they have their little quincunx, the dance of the quincunx going on. And that's an interesting dance, right? You know, because when we're really aligned, our ability to communicate is connected with our ability to act in a perfectly aligned and holistic expression of self. The two are in sync and in balance with one another. So today, some fine tuning. You know, just before Mars goes direct tomorrow on Friday the 13th, there's some fine tuning involved here. So again, when it comes to communicating all important matters, during a retrograde, you have to use circumspection, right? That is always the key. Use a little bit of circumspection. And before you hit send on that email, before you hit send on that text, what's the word that you want to tap? Review, right? You want to review during a Mercury retrograde. The other thing too is that what you say or what you communicate during this time with that in conjunct with Mars can be misconstrued. And if something's happened in the past, in the recent past, where people have misunderstood what you've said, and there's been some kind of a breakdown in communication, the Mercury retrograde with an inconjunct with Mars might be a good time to address that. That's what I think, right? So instead of moving forward, go back and look at your communications, over the past couple of weeks since Mercury went retrograde. And if something feels like there's a gap or there's kind of a broken link in the chain of communication, address it. Right. And it's not a bad time to do that because, people are not used to other people being mindful during this time. Right. It seems to me like we've dropped a lot of common courtesy and a lot of the social codes that allow us to live on a day-to-day basis. So when a person goes back and redresses something, it will catch somebody off guard. Because the world is kind of Pavlovian, right? This is how we've unfortunately evolved or perhaps de-evolved over the last 2 years. So when you're actually able to do something where the person says, wow, they thought about me, or man, yeah, it was a bit of a problem and it kind of bugged me, but now we get to deal with it and I get it. I get where you're coming from now. And human relations are really important. They're very, very important. And we've lost touch with a lot of that. And maybe I'll do a show on that at 9/11 over my other channel. And again, as the moon approaches Libra for the weekend, setting up those kinds of social interactions or the ability to move effortlessly with the moon in Libra and finding balanced and synergistic components with how to relate and emote, it can be very, very helpful. Now, I'll probably cover this tomorrow. We'll get some squares with the moon this weekend with those Capricorn planets, but we'll also, at the beginning of the first decan, have a nice trine with Venus in Aquarius, and then the moon will actually be in trine with Mars moving forward. So we'll have a grand trine this weekend, a grand air trine this weekend. And I think that'll be a good thing for all of us, right? The other thing that's going on with the moon that I noticed here is an inconjunct with Saturn. Yes, there are two inconjuncts today. You can see Saturn over here in Aquarius and the moon in Virgo, two signs that have nothing to do with one another, but now they're in an uncomfortable relationship. When it comes to this inconjunct, if you're at work today or doing things that are related to work and you have to answer to somebody, that can be kind of tricky, right? Because you may have your own system in place, which allows you to be uber efficient. Meanwhile, Saturn, which represents authority and hierarchies, and in Aquarius want to rein you in, ask you, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Did you clear that with me? And to me, this is I've always hated the word boss. I don't like the word boss. I don't like the word landlord either. They to me, they're just kind of despicable words, right? But let's use the word supervisor or manager. They're a little bit less insulting. This is where the supervisor, the manager, sticks their nose in what you're doing. And what you really want to say over here with the inconjunct with Mercury and Mars is like, F you, I've got this, right? That's really what it's about. Because you know exactly what you need to do, what to get done. So how do you deal with that? Well, the moon in Virgo is pretty critical and a little prickly, right? A little prickly. But luckily we have this nice Venus trine into Mars, and you could just kind of pat your supervisor or manager on the head and say, you know what? That sounds like a really good idea. And that's exactly what I'm about to do. And guess what? You're probably about to do it. And they'll feel really good about their ability to make sure they're getting the most productivity out of you as they possibly can, so they can report to the person above them and do their weekly report, which we're coming up on. So in general, I really like today, and get ready for that early spring with Juno going into Aries, and work on cleaning up your act. If you do it, it will pay dividends. All right, star of the day. I'm trying to keep these economical and on time. Normally, I look to find the star of the day, and it's a person who's either inspiring or interesting, right? And today, I kind of broke the mold a little bit because I don't find this person to be inspiring at all. And I find them to be moderately interesting. So today's star of the day is Howard Stern. And there's a reason why I chose Howard Stern today. It's a bit of a teaching moment in astrology. So there he is, the king of terrestrial radio. I guess that's what they called him once he moved over to, what is it, Sirius or XM? I don't follow those things. So you can see straight out of the gate, that is the coif, the mane of a Leo rising. You want to look at Leo rising? Here you go. And even to this day, at Stern's advanced age, he still maintains a copious amount of hair on his head, even though it looks decidedly different than this. But the thing I was really interested in looking at with this chart, not just due to the fact that he's a Leo rising, they tend to be dominant personalities. And of course, you get the Leo hair. But what was going on for him during COVID? COVID changed Howard Stern. So what I'm going to do now really quickly is I'm going to go to a different version of his chart so I can make it bigger. I can make Howard Stern even bigger than he is. By the way, talk radio, Eric Bogosian. Highly recommend it. So this is a transit for March 13th, 2020. Now, COVID is generally connected to the date of March 11th, 3/11, of course. But on Friday the 13th, President Donald Trump declared an emergency. 2 weeks to stop the spread. A month later, on April 13th, he did even more and enacted a number of different measures via executive order. We're not going to revisit Trump. What we will look at is how COVID impacted Howard Stern. Howard Stern is a germaphobe. Hello, sixth house. And Howard Stern has the true node and the sun in Capricorn. So what is he supposed to do? Well, Howard Stern is supposed to be successful, right? He's supposed to climb to the top. He's going to be known for his personality, his Capricornian ability to, in many ways, be ruthless, right? And I'm not saying that all Capricorns are ruthless, but Capricorns have their priorities. They understand where they're going. And more importantly, they understand what it takes to get there. So he has a sun true node conjunction, which really puts his sun up into the 10th house. It's a 10th house sun, but here it's in the 6th. And he's born just during a kind of a pre-eclipse moment, right? So in astrology, they have this thing called the pre-lunar eclipse and pre-solar eclipse. And those pre-eclipses are also interesting signatures as they relate to what's going on with you inside the womb. So here we see the pre-eclipse moment. Well, it's not really a pre-eclipse moment because he's born with the moon in Taurus, and roughly 48 hours later, right? It'll actually be 72, 2 days later, right? This moon will be over here on his south node. That'd be a lunar eclipse, by the way, right? Moon on the south node, lunar eclipse. So he's born here with the moon kind of moving into that pre-eclipse phase. But what happens with, he's got Chiron exactly conjunct his sun in the 6th house. And here we have Pluto. We have this Pluto conjunction with Chiron, Pluto conjunction with Mercury, Saturn conjunction, just kind of on the edge of it all, right? And what's happened to Howard Stern post March 13th, 2020? He hasn't left his fucking house. And he became an absolute tyrant when it came to vaccinations and demanding that people have the jab. So we can clearly see that these transits did not liberate Howard Stern at all. What it did is it made him dig deeper into any kind of neuroses or phobia that he has. Now, what's also really interesting is that he does the show from his home, right? So here we have Saturn and Mars. Hey, look, for somebody who is on radio and doing your show from your home, Saturn, Mars, the conjunction, not necessarily a bad aspect to have. But what's really interesting is that when he does go into the studio, he drives his car, or his driver probably drives his car, drives right to, I guess, what is it, the XM studios. And then his car goes into an elevator and goes straight up to the studio, straight up to the studio. He doesn't even get out of his car, right? This is how Howard Hughes-like Howard Stern has become. And again, you can really see here the amount of intensity and focus and drive with that Saturn-Mars conjunction, which is relentless, especially in Scorpio. Take no prisoners, right? Take no prisoners. And here he's got these sextiles kind of flaring off, 8 degrees Saturn trining his Venus. Mars 14 trining Mercury. So he's going to broadcast every day, and he's going to dive into scatological humor, right? Because that is what Scorpio does. Scorpio gets down into the bowels of things. Howard Stern must have some interesting shit going on in his house. That's all I have to say. Neptune, Jupiter trine, pretty creative. Of course, Jupiter up here in Gemini, which is the airwaves, right? This is the airwaves. Jupiter and Gemini in the 11th house is the airwaves. This is where he's going to make his bones. And the Neptune trine to Jupiter works with capturing people's imaginations. So it's a very interesting chart, and you can see how his work and how his persona and even his facial type, hair type, and body type are literally fleshed out in the chart. And you can also see the effects of the COVID crisis on Stern. It's right there, right? All through here, making him much more intensely and keenly aware of the potential for coming down with some kind of deadly strain of a virus that he had very little knowledge of. Very interesting chart. I'll also kind of end on this. I think Howard Stern is paranoid. Beyond the fact that he thinks that he can somehow come down with COVID or some other malady, that Neptune square to his sun, Neptune square to Chiron, and even Neptune squaring Mercury. To me, this is evoking like images and feelings of paranoia. So on the air, he has a release, right? He has a release for some of his symptomology. He has a release for some of his fears, even because Neptune will inflate your fear. So professionally, Neptune has a release. Personally, the guy's a mess. I can attest to that with this chart. Driven, focused, but a mess. So there you go. Star of the day, Howard Stern, completely changed and transformed by COVID. Oh, by the way, Howard's going to have Saturn going through his 8th house. His biggest test lies in front of him. Take care. You've been watching Astro Weather. Oh, by the way, I am doing another show, which I do on my channel over on 15 Minutes of Flame. Let me throw the graphic up there. 9:11 a.m. to 10:41 a.m. Central Standard Time. And please join us. We get to talk about things that adults get to talk about. Hey, how about that? There's no nanny state around to wave their finger at you and say, No, 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 no. You're being a bad boy. You're being a bad girl. Here comes that bar of soap. Open up your mouth. So please join us. We have a good crowd and hope to see you there. Everybody, have a very blessed day. Be grateful for who you are and what you have, even though during this time of forced austerity, our options seem to be getting more expensive by the day. But do your best to remember that a lot of other people have it way worse, way, way worse. That's a Virgo moon sentiment, isn't it? Take good care. We'll see you here tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bye for now.